The last tent before the summit of Mount Everest is not a place for surprises. Up there, everything is accounted for. Every oxygen bottle, every carabiner, every frozen knot in a rope. Because at 26,000 feet, the mountain punishes imagination. It rewards only discipline. That's why the tent shouldn't have been there. It appeared like a bruise on the white, half buried, bent under spindrift, its guy lines humming in the wind like a warning. No flag, no team marker, no fresh tracks. Just a single dome of faded fabric, crouched behind a ridge of ice, as if it had crawled there to hide. We were already late. My fingers were numb inside thick mitts, and my mind was narrowing to one thought: keep moving, keep breathing, don't look down. But my climbing partner, Aaron, stopped so abruptly I nearly ran into him. He stared at the tent. "There's no one camped here," he said, voice tight through his mask. I should have agreed. I should have pulled him away. Every rule on Everest exists because someone died breaking it, and yet there was something else, a detail that turned my stomach. The zipper wasn't frozen shut. It was slightly open, just enough for the wind to catch it, tapping the flap like a restless finger. Tap, 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 as if someone inside was trying to answer. Aaron leaned closer, his headlamp slicing through the blowing snow. I saw him hesitate, like he'd just remembered a name he didn't want to say out loud. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I listened. Beneath the wind, faint, impossibly faint, came the sound of breathing. Slow. Human. My hand went to the zipper, and for the first time all night, the mountain felt like it was watching. I pulled the flap open, and there was someone inside. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. If you've ever watched an Everest documentary, you know the summit is only half the battle. The real danger lives in the decisions climbers make when they're exhausted, oxygen-starved, and desperate to believe everything will be fine. This story is about one of those decisions, the kind you don't undo. Two climbers, one final push, and a tent that shouldn't exist. The last shelter before the top, sitting alone in the death zone like it was waiting. No radio calls, no expedition flags, no footsteps in or out. Just a zipper that moved too easily, and the unmistakable sound of someone breathing in the dark. In a place where your own breath is a precious resource, hearing another person's breathing should be a relief. But up there, relief is rarely pure. It's usually mixed with fear, doubt, and the cold logic of survival. If someone is alive inside that tent, why are they still here? And if they're not supposed to be alive, then what exactly are we about to see? Before we go any further, take a second to let me know where you're watching from, what country, what city. I read the comments, and it's always incredible to see how far these stories reach. And if you enjoy intense survival narratives, realistic, immersive, and built on the kinds of dangers explorers truly face, hit subscribe and leave a like. It helps more than you think, and it tells me to keep bringing you deeper into the world's most unforgiving places. Now, picture the wind hammering the ice, headlamps swallowed by snow, and the tent flap lifting like a mouth about to speak. Because the moment we opened that shelter, the mountain stopped feeling empty, and we realized we were not alone. We were already moving on borrowed time when the tent appeared. Two small figures stitched into a blizzard, climbing a world made of ice and thin air. The South Col had vanished behind us into a dim, bitter memory, and the slope above was a pale wall that refused to feel closer no matter how many steps we took. At that altitude, your body doesn't argue politely. It protests. Every motion becomes a negotiation. Your lungs burn as if you're breathing through cloth soaked in smoke. Your thoughts arrive slowly, like messages carried by a tired runner. And the cold, Everest's cold, doesn't just chill you. It tries to erase you. My name is Cole Mercer, and I had spent years training for this ridge of frozen nightmares. I wasn't new to big mountains, but Everest is not simply bigger. It is more final. It strips away the comfort of mistakes. Up there, One wrong choice isn't a lesson. It's an ending. Aaron Klein climbed a few steps ahead of me, clipped into the fixed line with the steady rhythm of a man who'd learned to ignore his own fear. He was a former army medic turned high-altitude guide, lean and quiet, with eyes that stayed calm even when the world spun. I trusted him more than I trusted my own judgment in that death zone. Our headlamps carved thin tunnels through the blowing snow. The wind slapped the ridge with invisible hands, making the ropes thrash and the prayer flags, if any were left, snap like gunfire. Somewhere above, the Hillary Step waited, and beyond it, the summit. But the summit didn't feel like a place. It felt like an idea people died chasing. We hadn't planned to stop again before pushing to the top. The last safe place, if that word meant anything up there, was behind us. Still, when Aaron froze in place, I stopped too, because your partner's body language on Everest is its own language. Danger. He didn't turn right away. He just stared forward, headlamp locked on something half buried behind a ridge of ice. At first, it looked like debris, a collapsed shelter, a piece of someone else's attempt, abandoned and swallowed by storms. But as my brain caught up, my stomach tightened. It was a tent. Not a bright, branded expedition dome you'd expect at high camp, but a faded, weather-worn thing, grey and yellow once perhaps, now coated in frost and battered by spindrift. The guy lines were still anchored. The poles still held some shape. The entrance faced away from the worst of the wind, tucked into a small crease of the slope, like someone had chosen the spot carefully, and it shouldn't have been there. I scanned the snow for footprints. There were none, only the smooth, rippled surface the wind creates when it's been blowing for days. No crampon marks, no dragged sled, no signs of movement. Aaron leaned closer, his gloved hand rising slowly, like he expected the tent to bite him. "There's no team marker," he said, voice muffled by his mask and the hiss of oxygen. "No flags, nothing." I stepped up beside him. My eyes kept returning to the entrance flap. The zipper was not frozen. It sat slightly open, the gap no wider than 2 fingers. The wind caught it and made it tap against the fabric. Tap, tap, tap. A small rhythmic sound that didn't belong in the chaos. My throat felt dry even behind the mask. "Could be abandoned," I said, though the words came out unconvincing. Aaron's headlamp shifted, scanning the seams, the lines, the edges. "This is above where anyone would camp," he said, "and if it was abandoned, it'd be ripped to shreds by now." He was right. Everest takes what you leave behind. It destroys it, buries it, scatters it. Anything that survives up here usually survives because someone is still caring for it. I felt my heart tap against my ribs, not fast but heavy, like a fist knocking from the inside. Aaron moved closer to the flap, and I caught a flicker in his posture. Hesitation, the sort that only appears when a man is weighing rules against instincts. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I listened. The wind howled, the rope sang, the fabric flapped. And beneath it all, there was something else. A sound so faint I doubted it at first. A slow inhale, a slow exhale, ragged at the edges but undeniably human. My mouth went numb, and for a moment I imagined my brain was inventing it. Oxygen-deprived hallucinations, the kind climbers warn each other about. But Aaron heard it too. I could tell by the way his eyes sharpened. He looked back at me. "Cole," he said, steady but urgent. "We don't do this. We keep moving." I nodded. I knew the rule. You don't play hero in the death zone. Every rescue attempt above 8,000 meters becomes another emergency, and yet the sound of breathing is an anchor for the human mind. It pulls at something older than logic. "Someone's alive," I said. Aaron didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached to the flap and held it, just enough to stop the tapping. The sudden silence felt worse. Then, from inside, a whisper scraped the fabric, so soft I almost missed it. "Help," one word. small, fragile, like a candle flame in a storm. Aaron's eyes widened. He didn't move for a heartbeat, as if the mountain itself had spoken. I stepped forward before my courage could drain away. "We check," I said. "1 minute. If they're alive, we do what?" Aaron snapped, then immediately lowered his voice. The anger wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed at the impossible choice. "We're not dragging anyone down from here. We barely have oxygen for ourselves." He was right. We carried a limited reserve, enough for the summit push and the descent to a lower camp. Giving away oxygen at this altitude can kill you. Refusing to help can haunt you forever. I reached for the zipper with clumsy fingers. My mitts were too thick, my hands too cold. Aaron swore under his breath, then did it himself with sharper, practiced movements. The zipper slid. It slid far too easily. The flap opened, and the first thing that hit us wasn't a smell, like you'd expect from an abandoned high-altitude shelter. It was warmth. Not warmth like a heater. Nothing up here is truly warm, but a pocket of air that was less murderous than the wind outside, like someone had managed to trap a small fraction of survival inside fabric and poles. Our headlamps cut through the dim interior. A figure lay inside on a thin sleeping pad, wrapped in layers that looked ancient and mismatched. Old down, faded shell fabric, a balaclava pulled tight. Their face was partly visible, skin pale and waxy, lips cracked. But their eyes were open. They stared up at us as if we were a dream. For a moment, I couldn't tell if the person was a man or a woman. The face was too hollowed by cold and starvation. But the eyes, those eyes, had awareness in them. Aaron crouched at the entrance, careful not to collapse the tent. He leaned in, headlamp shining across the figure's chest. The person's breathing was shallow, but real. A small plume of frost puffed from their mask with each exhale. "Oh my God," I whispered. The figure tried to speak again, but only a rasp came out. Aaron's medic instincts took over. He reached in slowly, palm up, showing he wasn't a threat. "Hey," he said, voice calm, the tone he'd use with a panicked patient. "I'm Aaron. Can you tell me your name?" The figure blinked. Their gaze shifted to Aaron's oxygen mask, then to mine. Their lips moved. "Eli," the voice scraped out. "Eli. Eli," Aaron repeated. "Okay. Eli, what team are you with?" The figure's eyes darted, unfocused. Then they shook their heads, small and weak. "No! Team!" I felt the hair rise under my hat. Nobody climbs Everest alone. Not up here, not this high, not and survives. Aaron glanced back at me, and in his eyes I saw the same thought. This doesn't make sense. He turned back. "Eli, how long have you been here?" Eli's mouth opened, and for a second the headlamp caught something on the inside of their jacket. A patch. A stitched emblem, old and frayed. It looked like a climbing club badge from decades ago. Eli's lips trembled. Night after night. Not a number. Not a date. Just a phrase. Aaron took a slow breath, forced himself to stay clinical. He reached in and checked Eli's glove, gently lifting a wrist to feel for a pulse. Then his expression changed. He pulled his hand back as if he'd touched a wire. "What?" I asked, but my voice sounded distant. Aaron leaned closer again, his headlamp narrowing. He stared at Eli's wrist, then he shook his head, once, hard, like he was trying to dislodge what he'd just noticed. "There's—" he began, then stopped. "What is it?" I demanded, panic creeping in around the edges of my mind. Aaron swallowed. "The pulse is weak," he said quickly, too quickly, "very weak, hypothermia, severe." But I saw his eyes again. He wasn't telling me something. I leaned into the tent, ignoring the ache in my knees. My headlamp swept over Eli's gear. No modern oxygen system, no fresh canisters, no new ropes. The sleeping bag looked old, too old. The tent fabric had that brittle, sun-damaged look that takes years to develop. And yet Eli was alive. Eli's eyes locked onto mine. A flicker of recognition passed through them, something like relief, then fear. They whispered again, the voice barely audible. "Don't go to the top." I froze. Aaron stiffened. "What did you say?" Eli's cracked lips moved. "Don't go, not tonight." I felt a coldness deeper than the air temperature, a chill that came from meaning. It wasn't a random warning. It sounded like certainty. Aaron tried again. "Eli, why? What happened up there?" Eli's gaze drifted toward the tent ceiling as if they could see through it. Their eyes filled with tears that immediately thickened in the cold. "The trail changed," they whispered. "It moved." My mind rejected the words. Trails don't move. Fixed lines don't relocate themselves. On Everest, you follow the rope or you die. Aaron's face hardened. "Cole," he said quietly, stepping back out of the tent, letting the flap fall partly closed to keep the wind from rushing in. "We need to leave." My stomach lurched. "We can't just—" "We can," he said, harsh now, the mask of calm slipping. "Because if we stay, we die, and if we try to move him, we die, and if we give him our oxygen, we die faster." "He's alive!" I shot back, and the words came out like an accusation. Aaron's eyes flashed. "So are we, for now." The wind surged, snapping the flap. The rope above us groaned. Inside, Eli made a sound, half cough, half sob. I stared at the entrance, my mind splitting into two voices. One screamed, "Keep moving, survive." The other whispered, "If you leave, you'll never come back from it." Aaron gripped my sleeve. "Cole, look at me." He waited until my eyes met his. "You want the truth? People die up here, and their bodies stay. Sometimes storms uncover old camps. Sometimes you find gear from 20 years ago. Sometimes you find—" He stopped. His gaze flicked to the tent. "Sometimes you find something that makes you think it's not over," he finished, voice low. I pulled my arm free. "You think he's not real?" Aaron didn't answer. I stepped back toward the flap again. "Eli," I called, leaning in. "Listen to me. What's your last name?" Eli's eyes fluttered. "Voss." The name hit Aaron like a punch. He went pale beneath the frost on his face. He whispered, almost to himself, "No." "What?" I said. Aaron's voice cracked. "Eli Voss was on the missing list." My throat tightened. "Missing list?" Aaron nodded once, slow, like he didn't want the words to exist. "There was a climber, years ago. Solo attempt. Vanished above the South Col. They never found the body." My headlamp trembled as my hand shook. "How many years?" Aaron looked away, as if checking the slope for an excuse not to say it. 27, he said. The wind swallowed the silence that followed, but it couldn't swallow the meaning. Inside the tent, Eli Voss blinked at us, eyes wet and alive, and whispered one more time, soft as snow landing on fabric, "It's waiting." And then the tent shuddered, not from wind, but from something that felt like a slow, deliberate push from the outside. Aaron's head snapped up. His hand flew to the fixed line. I turned toward the darkness beyond our headlamps, and for a fraction of a second, through the blowing snow, I saw a shape pass between us and the stars, too tall, too smooth, moving without urgency, as if it already knew we couldn't run. Then it vanished into the white, but the rope above us kept vibrating, like something heavy had just touched it. Aaron grabbed my harness. "Now," he said, "we move, right now." Behind me, inside the tent, Eli's breathing turned into a thin, terrified whimper. And somewhere above, on the invisible trail to the summit, the wind changed direction, like the mountain was inhaling. Aaron didn't wait for my answer. He clipped higher on the fixed line and hauled himself forward with a force that looked almost angry. Anger is useful on Everest. It burns hot, it cuts through the fog, and it keeps you moving when your body begs you to stop. I followed because the alternative was standing still with questions I couldn't afford. The tent fell behind us, swallowed almost instantly by spindrift. but I could still feel it in my mind like a hook snagged in flesh. Eli Voss. Missing for 27 years. Breathing. I kept turning my head, scanning the slope behind, though there was nothing but white and black and the frantic beam of my headlamp. The shape I'd seen, if I'd seen it, was already gone. My brain tried to rationalize it, a gust-driven curtain of snow, a trick of angles, oxygen deprivation making shadows into monsters. But the fixed rope kept trembling for another 10 seconds, not flapping, trembling, as if it carried the aftershock of a heavy touch. Aaron climbed without looking back. He moved with the kind of grim concentration that tells you he's trying not to think. We reached a short traverse where the ridge narrowed. The wind ripped across it sideways, trying to peel us off the mountain like tape. Our headlamps caught ice crystals swirling in the beam, making the world look like it was full of tiny, fast-moving insects. I stopped at the edge of the traverse to catch breath. Every inhale sounded like sandpaper. Aaron turned, just enough to see my face. "Don't lag," he said. "Keep the rhythm." I wanted to shout at him. I wanted to demand an explanation, a plan, a moral accounting. But Everest doesn't care about moral accounting. Everest cares about movement. We crossed. Halfway through, my crampons scraped on blue ice. I leaned into the rope, weight hanging from my harness, and the mountain responded with a faint creak, like a ship shifting under pressure. That's when my radio crackled. I nearly dropped it from surprise. No one was supposed to be on this channel except our support team lower down. At this altitude, reception comes and goes, but you don't get sudden clear audio unless someone nearby is broadcasting. A voice came through, low, breathy. "Cole." My spine went rigid. Aaron saw my reaction. "What?" I pressed the radio closer to my ear, heart hammering. Did you hear that?" The radio crackled again. "Cole, don't." It was Eli's voice, the same thin rasp, the same fragile cadence. Aaron's eyes widened, then narrowed in immediate suspicion. He leaned in. "That's not possible," he said. "How?" I started, but the radio hissed and cut. We finished the traverse and crouched behind a small bulge of ice that broke the wind. Aaron pulled his mask slightly away from his face, just long enough to shout without his voice vanishing into fabric. "Okay," he said, forced calm. "Tell me exactly what you heard." I repeated it. He listened, jaw tight. "That tent had no radio set up," he said, mostly to himself. "No antenna. Nothing. Unless it's buried," I argued. "Unless he has something old, something—" "Old doesn't matter," Aaron snapped. "Batteries don't last 27 years. Radios don't sit in the death zone and magically work." My hands were shaking. "Then what is it?" Aaron looked past me up the ridge, where the slope climbed into darkness and storm. "Hallucinations," he said bluntly. "Hypoxia. You're hearing what you expect to hear." I wanted to believe him. I needed to. Because the other explanation was that the mountain had found a way to speak. We resumed climbing. Our steps fell into the same rhythm. Clip, step, step, breathe, clip. The world narrowed to the cone of my headlamp and the sound of my own oxygen. But the radio stayed warm in my hand, like a living thing. 15 minutes later, it crackled again. This time, it wasn't Eli. It was a different voice, clearer, calmer, and far too close to our frequency. "Turn around." Aaron stopped dead. I stopped too, nearly colliding with him. "What the hell?" Aaron whispered. The radio repeated, as if someone had leaned close to a microphone. "Turn around." I pressed the transmit button, though my glove fumbled it. "This is Cole Mercer, South Ridge Line. Identify yourself." Silence. Then a soft chuckle, so quiet it might have been wind, except it came through the speaker with unmistakable intention. "Cole," the voice said, warm now, almost friendly. "You already opened it." My blood turned to ice. Aaron snatched the radio from my hand and held it to his ear. "Who is this?" he barked. "State your team and position." The radio hissed, and then, in the same friendly tone, it said Aaron's name. "Aaron!" His face drained. I watched him swallow, the movement visible even behind his mask. "No," Aaron said low. "No, that's not—" The voice continued. "I remember you, from the photograph." Aaron's hand clenched around the radio so hard his knuckles whitened. "What photograph?" I demanded. But Aaron didn't answer. His eyes had gone distant, pulled back into some memory he didn't want to show me. He shoved the radio into my chest. "Off," he ordered. "Turn it off." I fumbled for the switch. My fingers were numb and clumsy. The radio crackled with static as if resisting. Finally it died. Only the wind remained. Aaron stared at me, eyes hard. "We are not listening to that again." "What photograph?" I insisted. He clipped higher on the rope. "Not now," he said. "Not here." We climbed in silence for a long stretch, each of us trapped inside our own breath and fear. The storm thinned for a moment, and the stars appeared, cold, sharp points above the ridge, like distant eyes. That should have been comforting. It wasn't. At around 2,700 feet, we reached a small plateau, a place climbers sometimes used as a brief rest point before the final push. The slope leveled just enough for you to stand without leaning into the rope like a man on the edge of a cliff. Aaron motioned for a 2-minute stop. He checked his gauges, his regulator, the frost on his mask. I did the same, forcing my hands to move. My oxygen was lower than I liked. I looked back down the ridge. The tent was invisible now, lost in darkness and snow, but the memory of the flap moving, too deliberately, wouldn't leave me. Aaron noticed my gaze. He stepped closer, voice low to keep the wind from stealing it. "Cole," he said, "we keep our heads, you hear me? We keep our heads." I nodded, though my mind was anything but steady. He hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out something I hadn't seen him carry before, a laminated photograph worn at the edges. He held it up between us, sheltering it from the wind with his body. In the photo, a younger Aaron stood in a snowy landscape beside an older man with a weathered face and bright eyes. The man wore an old-style climbing jacket and a knitted cap. Behind them, a base camp of tents and prayer flags. Aaron's finger tapped the older man's face. "That's Eli Voss," he said. I stared. The man in the photo was robust, alive, smiling, not the hollow-eyed figure we'd seen in the tent. "You knew him?" I asked, shocked. Aaron's eyes flickered with pain. "My father knew him," he said. "My dad was on one of the support teams when Voss tried his solo push. He came back without him." My throat tightened. "And you have that photo?" "Why?" Aaron's voice lowered further. "Because my dad died 3 years ago," he said. "And before he did, he told me something he never told anyone else." The wind surged, and for a moment his words almost vanished. "He said Voss didn't just go missing," Aaron continued. "He said Voss called in from high on the ridge, screaming about a tent that wasn't on the map, a shelter that appeared where it couldn't. He said Voss kept repeating one phrase." Aaron swallowed, eyes fixed on the photo like it could anchor him. "He said Voss told them the trail changed." My stomach clenched. Aaron's gaze snapped up to mine. "My dad wrote it off as hypoxia. Everyone did. They said Voss panicked and fell. They said the mountain took him." He leaned in closer. "But my dad kept the photo because he said Voss was the best climber he ever saw, and he said something frightened him more than the mountain ever did." My mouth felt dry. "What?" Aaron's lips tightened. "He said Voss sounded like a man who'd realized he wasn't alone up there." The ridge seemed to narrow around us, as if the mountain had moved closer to listen. I stared at the photo again, then at Aaron. "So you think the tent—" "I don't know what I think," Aaron cut in. "But I know this. If there's something using radios, using voices, using names, it's not trying to help us." A gust slammed into us, and the rope vibrated again, hard, sharp, like a plucked wire. We both froze. The vibration didn't come from wind. It came from above. Aaron's headlamp shot upward. In the beam, the fixed line disappeared into darkness. Snow swirled thick, then thinned for a fraction of a second. And there, just at the edge of visibility, something moved. Not a climber, not the chaotic tumble of spindrift. A shape passed across the slope above us, tall and pale, with limbs that looked too long. It moved slowly, as if it didn't need to hurry, as if the mountain belonged to it. My mouth opened, but no sound came. Aaron grabbed my shoulder, squeezing hard enough to hurt. "Don't stare," he hissed. "Don't give it attention." The shape paused. I felt the irrational certainty of being observed, like a gaze had settled on my skin beneath layers of fabric. Then in the snow, something glinted, 2 points catching our headlamp for an instant, like wet stone. Eyes. My body reacted before my mind could. I jerked my gaze away, staring at my own boots, forcing myself to breathe. Aaron's grip tightened. "Move," he said, low and fierce. "Now, we're not stopping again." We climbed. Behind us, the slope remained silent except for wind, but I could feel the presence above like a pressure in the air. Minutes passed, 10, 15, time stretched and warped. Then, without warning, the fixed line went slack. Not broken, slack as if the anchor point ahead had been shifted, or the rope had been lifted and released. Aaron cursed. He climbed faster, scanning for the next anchor. When his headlamp finally caught it, my stomach dropped. The rope led slightly left, off the known track, toward a section of ridge that looked wrong. Not dangerous in the obvious way, but unfamiliar. The snow there had a different texture, smoother, untouched. Aaron stared at it, breathing hard. "This isn't right," he said. I peered into the darkness. The usual path should have angled right, toward a safer line around a bulge of rock. But the rope, our lifeline, was guiding us left. "Maybe the route changed," I offered weakly. Aaron shook his head. "Not this high, not overnight, not without someone telling—" His voice cut off as the radio in my pocket crackled to life again, though I had turned it off. A hiss, then that friendly voice. "Left is faster," it said. Aaron's eyes snapped to me. "Cole, throw it," he snarled. I ripped the radio from my pocket and stared at it like it was burning me. The speaker hissed, then whispered again. "You opened it," the voice reminded. I flung the radio down the slope. It vanished into darkness, bouncing once, then swallowed by snow. Silence. For a heartbeat, it felt like we'd cut a tether. Aaron stared at the rope leading left. His breath came in harsh bursts. "We don't follow that," he said. "We find the real line." "How?" I demanded. "The rope is the line." Aaron's eyes flicked upward, then back down. "We backtrack," he said. "We find the last anchor. We check the junction. Backing down in the death zone is dangerous, but following a rope that didn't feel right was worse. We began descending carefully, reversing steps, unclipping and reclipping with trembling hands. My heart hammered with each movement. Halfway back to the last anchor, my headlamp caught something on the snow, something that hadn't been there before. A footprint, not a crampon print, not a boot. A bare impression, long, deep, with a shape that looked almost like a human foot, but stretched, as if the toes had been pulled forward. The snow around it was pressed hard, not scuffed. I stopped, frozen. Aaron saw it and swore under his breath. We stared at the single print, the storm trying to fill it in. Then we noticed the second, and the third, a line of them leading toward the left path, the false rope. My throat tightened. "Get walked here," I whispered. Aaron's voice was brittle. "Or it wants us to think it did." A sudden gust blasted us from behind, almost knocking me off balance. In that gust I heard it, not through the radio, not through static, through the open air, a voice close to my ear, though no one stood beside me. "Cole!" I spun, headlamp whipping around. Nothing. Aaron's eyes were wide. He'd heard something too, I could tell. He leaned in, voice shaking with controlled fury. "Do not answer it," he said. "Do you understand? If it uses your name, if it uses someone you love, do not answer." My mind flashed to my wife back home, to the last phone call before base camp. The way she'd tried to sound brave, the way her voice had cracked. I swallowed hard. "What is it?" I asked. Aaron looked up the ridge, where the rope still tugged left like an invitation. Then he said the words I never expected to hear from a man like him. "I don't know," he admitted, "but my father called it the listener." The wind rose again, and the ridge felt suddenly narrower, the darkness closer. Aaron clipped back to the last anchor point and forced us right, off the misleading rope onto a line of rock and snow that matched his memory of the route. We climbed without speaking, each step heavy with the fear that the mountain itself had shifted under our feet. And just as the storm thinned for another moment, my headlamp caught something above, a familiar shape, half buried behind an ice ridge. Another tent, freshly placed, bright fabric, unweathered, with no frost on the zipper. And the entrance flap was already open, as if someone inside had been waiting for us to arrive. The second tent looked wrong in a different way than the first. The first one had been beaten into submission by the mountain, half-buried, sun-bleached, old enough to feel like an artifact. This one was bright, clean, and impossibly intact. The fabric held its color. The poles stood straight. The entrance flap hung open, as if someone had stepped out seconds ago and never came back, and there were still no tracks, no crampon prints, no dragged gear marks, no sign of a team establishing a last shelter before the summit push. It sat on the slope like it had been set down from the sky, perfectly positioned behind a small ridge that stole just enough wind to make it look inviting. Aaron stopped, breathing hard, headlamp fixed on the open flap. His eyes narrowed, and I could almost see his mind cycling through every reasonable explanation first, because that's what a sane person does at 8,400 meters. But Everest doesn't reward sanity. It rewards the ability to keep moving. "We don't go in," he said. My throat was tight. "What if it's a cache, a spare oxygen tent?" "Then it's not ours," Aaron snapped, then softened his tone as if he realized how thin the air was making him. "Cole, this is how people die. They see something that looks like relief, and they step off the line." I knew that was true. I also knew how desperate the mind becomes up there. You'll bargain with anything. You'll believe almost anything if it means warmth, oxygen, or a reason to stop trembling. The wind eased for a moment and the open flap lifted, revealing a darker interior. Then I heard it. Not on a radio, not through static, through the tent itself. A voice from inside, muffled by fabric, calm as a man speaking from across a living room. "Come in." I froze so hard my calves cramped. Aaron's head snapped toward me. "You heard that." I couldn't answer at first. My tongue felt thick. I managed a nod. Aaron took a single step back and forced his eyes away from the opening. "It's doing it again," he said, voice low, "using what we want." The voice spoke once more, gentle, almost amused. "You're cold." My stomach turned. The words weren't a guess. They were an observation, intimate and correct. Aaron's jaw clenched. He clipped higher on the fixed line, angling us to pass the tent without looking directly into it. I followed, but my eyes kept dragging back like magnets. The flap moved softly in the wind, and the dark inside seemed deeper than it should have been. The tent should have been a simple thing. Fabric, poles, a thin barrier against death. Instead, it felt like a doorway. We got past it by maybe 10 meters when the fixed rope suddenly jerked. Not from wind. A hard pull, sharp enough to make Aaron's carabiner rattle. He spun toward the anchor point above, headlamp darting. I watched the rope vibrate, the motion traveling down the line like a message. Then, from behind us, the tent flap rustled again. And something inside shifted, heavy enough that the tent floor creaked. Aaron's voice went flat. "Keep moving." But his body didn't move. He was staring at the slope between us and the tent, scanning for a shape in the snow. His eyes flicked to the open flap, then away again as if it burned. "Aaron," I said, trying to sound steadier than I felt. "We're losing time. We go." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up and touched the fixed rope with a gloved hand, as if checking whether it had iced over. His eyes widened. "There's frost, forming in a line," he said. I stared. The rope had a thin crust of rime building along it. Not unusual, but the pattern was strange, a clean, continuous band, as if warm breath had touched it and then frozen. Warm breath. At this altitude. Aaron pulled his hand back quickly, then forced himself to face the slope above. 2 minutes, he said, and I hated the way his voice sounded like he was convincing himself. We checked the tent. 2 minutes, Cole. If it's real and there's oxygen, we take what we can and we leave. If it's wrong, if anything feels wrong, we're gone. Anything, I echoed. He met my eyes. Anything. We turned back toward it. As we approached, the wind died again, unnaturally, like someone had lowered a volume knob. The tent stood in a pocket of stillness, fabric barely moving. My headlamp beam slid across the entrance and caught something hanging just inside, an object that made my heart stutter. A radio antenna. It was propped near the opening, angled upward, like it had been positioned to catch a signal. Aaron saw it too. His face tightened. No, he didn't step in. He crouched at the threshold and shone his light across the interior. The tent was organized. Too organized. A small pile of oxygen bottles stacked neatly along one side, their labels clean. A pack sitting upright, straps aligned. A sleeping bag rolled rather than crumpled. A pair of goggles folded carefully on top. Not how a storm leaves things, not how panic leaves things. And in the center, laid out like an offering, was a laminated photograph. Aaron's laminated photograph, the one he'd shown me minutes earlier, him and his father with Eli Voss at base camp. Aaron's breath caught. "That's impossible," he whispered. My skin prickled under layers. "You put it back in your jacket." "I did," he said, eyes locked on the photo. "I did." The tent made no sound. No breathing, no movement now, just the quiet presence of objects arranged to pull us in, to convince us that the mountain was capable of miracles. Aaron reached in with one gloved hand, slow, like he expected the air to bite. The moment his fingers touched the photo, the radio inside crackled. A burst of static, then a voice, clear, familiar, and cruelly gentle. It was Aaron's father. "Aaron," the voice said, warm with a man's affection, "don't be stubborn. Take the oxygen." Aaron froze as if struck. My own breath became a loud, panicked thing inside my mask. I watched Aaron's shoulders rise slightly, the reflex of a son hearing a dead man speak. The voice continued, softer now, intimate. "I'm proud of you, but you have to listen to me this time." Aaron's eyes glistened, and the sight of that, of a hardened guide cracking under an invisible hand, scared me more than any shadow on the ridge. He jerked his hand back, not taking the photo. "It's not him," he said through clenched teeth. "It's not him." The radio crackled, as if it enjoyed his denial. "I know what you did," the voice said. Aaron's head snapped up, eyes wild. "What I did?" The tense radio hissed, then spoke again with that same dead father warmth. "You left him." A pulse of anger flashed through Aaron's face, then something darker, guilt sharp enough to make him sway. I grabbed his harness. "Aaron, move," I said. "We don't take anything. We leave." But Aaron stood rigid, staring into the tent, like a man staring into a courtroom. The radio whispered, "You can fix it." That's when I saw it, something tucked beneath the photo. A small notebook, its cover stiff with cold, edges clean. It looked new, too new, like it had been carried up recently. I reached in before I could stop myself and snatched it. Aaron turned sharply. "Cole, I'm not staying," I snapped. "If there's a message, we read it while we're moving." We backed away from the tent, retreating to the fixed line, and the moment we did, the wind returned in a brutal gust. As if the mountain was angry we'd stepped out of its quiet pocket. Aaron clipped in, breathing hard. His eyes were unfocused, shaken loose from the anchor of reality. I shoved the notebook into my chest pocket, then forced my numb fingers to open it. The first page held a single sentence, written in neat, deliberate block letters. "You opened the wrong tent." My stomach dropped. I flipped the page. A list of names, each written with the same careful pressure. Cole Mercer, Aaron Klein, Eli Voss. And beneath those names, a date. Except it wasn't a date from our expedition plan. It was today's date. I turned another page, heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. The handwriting shifted, still neat, but now more urgent. The trail will offer you a shortcut. Do not take it. The summit is not empty. My headlamp beam trembled across the words as the wind screamed again. My hands shook, partly from cold, partly from the feeling that we were reading something we were never meant to see. Aaron glanced at the notebook, then away, as if he couldn't afford to look at it. We climbed. The slope steepened, forcing us into a slow, punishing rhythm. My thighs burned, my breath whistled. I tried not to think about the oxygen gauge ticking down with every inhale. The notebook's pages flapped slightly inside my pocket, and it felt like carrying a live animal against my chest. After another stretch, long enough that time stopped meaning much, we reached a section where the fixed lines split around a jagged bulge of rock. Normally, there'd be clear markers, flags, wands, footprints. But the storm had wiped most of it clean, and there it was again, the subtle wrongness. The left path looked smoother, easier, less exposed, less steep. The right path looked more treacherous, angling around rock with a sharper drop. Aaron stopped at the junction, headlamp sweeping, and I felt my body plead for the left route. Every survival instinct said, easier is safer. Then I saw the snow. The left path had that same unnatural texture, wind-slicked, untouched, too clean, like a stage set. Aaron's voice was hoarse. Right, he said. I nodded. Right. We went right. As we moved onto the more exposed line, my crampon slipped for a half-second on hard ice. My stomach lurched as my weight pulled on the rope. Aaron grabbed my arm and steadied me, anger and fear flaring in his eyes. Focus, he snapped. I am, I gasped. But the truth was, focusing was becoming a luxury. My brain felt thick, slow. I could sense hypoxia creeping in like a tide. Colors sharpened strangely. Sounds came and went, and then my mask hiss changed. A subtle difference, but a catastrophic one. My regulator sputtered, the oxygen flow stuttering as if the cold had bitten into the valve. I slapped my hand against it, trying to shake ice loose. The hiss returned, then weakened again. Aaron noticed immediately. Your flow? It's... I tried to inhale and felt the terrifying resistance of thin, unassisted air. It's icing. Aaron swore, clipped himself solidly to the line and leaned close. He took my regulator in his gloved hands and worked it, tapping and twisting with controlled urgency. Hold still, he ordered. I held still, though my knees trembled. He exhaled sharply, then did something I didn't expect. He brought his own mask close and blew warm air onto my valve, a risky move up here, exposing himself to cold and wasting precious oxygen. For a second, the flow steadied. I sucked in a deep, blessed breath and nearly cried from relief. Then Aaron's regulator made the same sound, a stutter, a cough of air. His eyes widened, and I saw immediate calculation. 2 regulators icing at the same time. Not coincidence. The cold was brutal, yes, but we'd managed it for hours. Regulators can ice, but usually in certain conditions, rapid flow, moisture. This felt timed. Like the mountain had waited for the junction, waited for the moment we committed to the harder path. Aaron turned his valve, trying to stabilize it. His oxygen hiss returned weakly, then faltered again. He looked at me, face tight. We need backup oxygen, he said. My blood ran cold. From the tent. Aaron's jaw clenched. The bright tent behind us felt suddenly closer, like it had been waiting for this exact problem to appear. We can't, I said. We can't do nothing, Aaron shot back, and there was anger now, not at me, but at the trap closing around us. He glanced down slope, then up. The summit ridge was still above, hidden, but close enough that turning back now would waste everything, and yet staying meant risking blackout, collapse, and death. He forced his voice steady. We take one bottle, one. We don't touch the radio, we don't look at the photo, we go in, grab, leave. My mouth was dry. And if it wants us to stay... Aaron stared at me with a look that was almost pleading. Then we don't stay. We unclipped carefully and began descending back toward the tent, every step stealing energy we couldn't afford. The wind hammered us as if punishing retreat. My lungs burned. Aaron's breathing had grown harsher, more desperate. When the tent finally appeared again through blowing snow, my stomach dropped at what I saw. The flap was no longer open. It was closed, zipped shut. And there, anchored in the snow directly in front of the entrance, was my radio. The same radio I had thrown down the slope in Chapter 2. It sat upright, clean, not half buried, not broken, as if it had been gently placed there by a careful hand. Aaron stopped dead. That's... I threw it, I whispered. I watched it fall. The radio crackled. My wife's voice came through the speaker, soft and trembling, the exact tone she used when she was trying not to cry. Cole, please, I don't like this. My knees nearly buckled. Aaron grabbed my harness hard, pulling me back from the radio as if it were a cliff edge. Do not answer, he hissed. Do not. The radio continued in her voice, more desperate now. Come back. Please, I can't. I squeezed my eyes shut, and in that darkness I saw home, warm lights, familiar walls, safety. My brain reached for it like a drowning man reaching for air. The zipper of the tent moved, not from wind, from the inside. A slow pull, deliberate. Aaron yanked me backward, away from the entrance, and the tent flap lifted. Something inside shifted again, heavy, patient. Then a voice came from within the tent, not through the radio. It wasn't friendly now. It wasn't playful. It was flat, certain, and close enough to feel like it brushed my ear. You should have stayed on the left. And as the flap opened wider, my headlamp beam fell into the tent and illuminated a figure sitting upright inside the sleeping bag, watching us with open eyes that reflected the light like wet stone. Eli Voss. Not collapsed. Not dying. Sitting up, breathing steadily, as if the last 27 years had been nothing more than a long wait. He looked at Aaron, then at me, and whispered with a voice that sounded far stronger than it should have at this altitude. It learned you. The wind died again, and somewhere above us, on the ridge toward the summit, multiple footsteps crunched in unison, slow, heavy, coming down the fixed line as if a group was descending. But no headlamps appeared, no voices called out. Only the sound of weight approaching through the storm, and Eli's eyes tracking upward as if he could see them coming. Aaron's grip tightened on my harness until it hurt. We run, he said, and the first shadow stepped into the edge of our headlamp beam, taller than any climber, moving without haste, like it knew there was nowhere left to go. Aaron pulled me hard enough that my crampons bit into the slope and sent a spray of ice into the air. For a heartbeat I couldn't move, my body locked between instinct and exhaustion, until the crunch of those footsteps above us became unmistakable. Not one set, not two, several. Slow, heavy, perfectly timed, coming down the fixed line like a procession that didn't need light to find its way. Then the shadow stepped fully into the edge of my headlamp beam. It wasn't a climber. It was the suggestion of one, tall, upright, broad-shouldered, except the proportions were wrong, and the surface of it swallowed detail the way deep snow swallows sound. The headlamp didn't reflect off fabric, goggles, or metal. It reflected in two wet points that held the light for a second too long. Aaron didn't let me stare. He yanked, and I stumbled, clipped back into the line, and we turned downhill. Running on Everest isn't running. It's falling forward in controlled panic. Each step is a violent demand on lungs that can't pay. The rope slapped against my harness, and the wind, like it had been waiting for the chase to begin, returned with a roar. Behind us, Eli Voss didn't call out. He didn't beg. He simply watched from the tent like a man who had seen this outcome before and found it inevitable. The radio in the snow crackled again, my wife's voice pleading through static, and I felt my hand twitch toward it like a reflex. Aaron shoved me away without looking back, forcing me into motion. "Eyes on your feet," he barked. "Breathe. Clip. Step. Clip." My regulator sputtered again, the oxygen flow thinning into a weak hiss. I slapped the valve, but the sound didn't recover. Aaron's own hiss was ragged now, too. Ice choking both systems at once, as if the mountain had timed our failure to the moment we needed clarity. We reached the junction where the rope had tried to pull us left, and in the storm it looked even more inviting. Smooth, wide, sheltered, a gentle descent for tired legs. And that's when the footsteps behind us multiplied. Not faster, never faster, just closer, the crunching synchronized as if several things had learned to walk like men. Their pace didn't change because it didn't need to. Aaron stopped so abruptly I slammed into him. He stared at the two options, then looked straight into my eyes. "We're not following the rope," he said. "What?" I gasped. He unclipped from the fixed line. For a second, the world tilted. Unclipping at this altitude is like taking your hand off the railing on a high bridge in a hurricane. Every safety lecture I'd ever heard screamed inside my skull. Aaron tugged a short coil of rope from his pack and shoved the end into my gloved palm. "We go by the ridge, rock to rock. No shortcuts, no invitations." My lungs burned. "And if we fall?" Aaron's eyes flashed. "Then we fall as ourselves." He clipped the coil to my harness and tied off, quick and practiced, turning us into a two-person unit again, a small lifeline not dependent on whatever the mountain had decided to do with the fixed route. Then he looked past me, up toward the tent. The shadow was closer now, still at the edge of visibility, still refusing to show detail. Yet the pressure of its presence made the air feel thicker, as if the death zone had become a room with the door shut. Aaron's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "Do not listen to anything it says. Do not answer your name." He tugged, and we moved off the fixed line and onto a line of hard, wind-scoured rock that ran like a spine down the slope. The crampons bit. The exposure yawned to our right, a vast black drop into cloud and storm. The footsteps behind us reached the junction and stopped. For one terrifying second, the crunching ceased, and the storm filled the silence like a living thing. I thought, irrationally, that maybe the rope had been a boundary it couldn't cross. Then the crunching started again, but now it came from our right, from a place that had no path. I didn't look. I didn't dare. But I felt it. Weight moving across snow that should have collapsed under it, approaching along our flank as if it had chosen to walk where humans couldn't. Aaron's hand squeezed the rope between us. "Keep going!" he hissed, and his voice carried a strain that cut through the cold. Fear, real and adult, the kind that comes when your instincts stop arguing. We descended in short, brutal bursts, moving from rock to rock, using the rope between us like a promise. My quads trembled. My fingers lost feeling. Every breath felt too small. Somewhere behind us a voice spoke, close, conversational, as if keeping pace. "Cole, you're tired." I clamped my jaw and stared at my boots. It tried again, softer. "Aaron, you know me." Aaron's shoulders tightened, but he didn't turn. He didn't speak. The voice changed, slipping into a tone that made my stomach twist. Aaron's father again, warm and familiar. "Son, don't punish yourself." Aaron stumbled for half a second, the rock under his crampon shifting. He caught himself, but that tiny falter felt like watching a crack form in a dam. I leaned close, forcing my voice through the mask. "It's not him," I said. "It's not him." Aaron didn't answer. His breathing sounded jagged, too fast. His oxygen flow stuttered again, then dipped. We couldn't keep this up without more oxygen, and the mountain knew it. When we reached a small hollow in the rocks, Aaron finally stopped, shielding us from the worst of the wind. He fumbled open his pack with numb fingers and pulled out a spare regulator line, then hesitated, staring at it like it was a joke. "No backup bottle," he said, voice thin. "We planned for one push, not a chase." My hands shook as I checked my gauge again. The needle had crept lower than my mind wanted to accept. A memory rose sharp and unwanted. The oxygen bottles stacked neatly inside that bright tent offered like salvation. Aaron saw it in my eyes. "No," he said immediately, reading me. "We don't take from it. Then we die," I snapped, and I hated how small my voice sounded against the wind. "Or we pass out and become whatever it wants." Aaron's jaw worked. The storm rattled the rocks. For a moment he looked older than he had hours ago. Then he made a decision I didn't expect. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the laminated photograph again, the one of him and his father with Eli Voss. His hand trembled, not from cold. He stared at it as if addressing a ghost, then shoved it into my palm. "If I lose my head," he said, low and urgent, "you throw this away, you hear me? You do not let it use this to turn me." My throat tightened. "Aaron, promise me." "I promise," I said, and the word felt heavy as stone. He tucked the photo away again and clipped back to the rope between us. "We go lower," he said. "We get out of this band of cold. We thaw the valves. We keep moving until the mountain can't speak clearly." We resumed, descending toward where the South Col should have been, toward the only place that still felt like reality. The crunching footsteps kept pace. Sometimes they sounded directly behind us. Sometimes they shifted to our side. Sometimes they vanished entirely, only to return closer, as if distance didn't matter. And the voices, those were worse. My wife, my mother. A friend I hadn't thought about in years. Each voice precise, each phrase chosen to hook something deep. Guilt, longing, fear of being forgotten. At one point the voice became mine, not like a recording, like a living version of me, speaking with calm certainty. "Cole," it said, "you're already gone." My stomach lurched, and I nearly slipped, caught only because Aaron's rope snapped taut between us. He didn't scold me, he just pulled once, firm, and kept going. We dropped lower by a few hundred feet, and for the first time in what felt like hours, the wind shifted in a way that wasn't hostile. It was merely wind again, not a pressure with intention. My regulator hiss strengthened slightly, the stutter easing as the cold loosened its grip. Aaron's flow steadied too. I exhaled a shaky breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Then the ridge opened, and the South Col appeared through the storm. Dark shapes of tents, fluttering flags, a low, grim sprawl of human stubbornness on a saddle of ice. Relief hit me so hard, my knees went weak. "We made it," I rasped. Aaron didn't celebrate. He scanned the camp with a guide's suspicion. Something was wrong. No headlamps, no movement, no figures stepping out to wave us in. At that hour, there should have been at least a few Sherpas awake, checking lines, preparing for returning climbers. The camp looked dead. We stumbled in, following a line of half-buried wands. My heart pounded, not just from exertion now, but dread. Reality shouldn't feel this quiet. We reached our main tent. The zipper was closed. Aaron called out, voice hoarse, "Base Camp South Col. This is Aaron Klein. Response." No answer. Only wind. He grabbed the zipper and yanked. The flap opened to darkness. Our sleeping bags lay in place, but the space felt too clean, too untouched. The stove sat exactly where we'd left it. The gear piles were neat, and the radio inside, our camp radio, was on, its speaker alive with soft static. Aaron stepped in and stared at it like a man confronting an animal he'd sworn he wouldn't approach. Then the radio spoke. It wasn't a teammate. It was Eli Voss. "Too late," Eli's voice said calmly. "You brought it down." I felt something in my chest go cold and hollow. Aaron lunged and shut the radio off. Silence. For a moment, we just stood there, breathing hard, staring at each other in the dim tent light. Then from outside, the crunching footsteps reached the edge of camp. They stopped. The stillness that followed was absolute, as if the wind itself had paused to listen. Aaron whispered, barely moving his lips. "It followed." I stared at the entrance flap, half expecting it to open by itself. Instead, a shadow fell across the tent wall, tall, upright, unmoving. No zipper sound, no fabric rustle, just the presence outside, close enough that it blocked my headlamp beam. Aaron's eyes flicked to the stove, then to the fuel canister, then back to me. An unspoken plan forming, desperate and ugly. I understood immediately. Fire is one of the few languages the mountain still respects, but fire inside a tent at this altitude is dangerous. One mistake and you don't just burn. Your oxygen, your shelter, your last margin of survival becomes smoke and panic. Aaron didn't light it yet. He listened. He waited. And the voice came. Not through any radio now, but through the tent fabric itself, as if the sound traveled through the material, soft, patient. "Aaron," it said in his father's voice, "open the flap. Let me see you." Aaron's face contorted with pain. His eyes squeezed shut for half a second, like he was bracing against a memory. Then he did something that shocked me. He answered, not to the voice, to the truth. "I left him," Aaron whispered, voice breaking. "I left a man to die up here." My breath caught. Aaron stared at the tent wall, tears freezing at the corners of his eyes. "It was years ago," he said, words tumbling out like confession. "A rescue attempt. One climber was alive, barely. We had oxygen for one descent. I chose the client. The paying client. I told myself it was logistics, that it was survival math, but it was cowardice." The shadow outside didn't move. The voice softened, almost tender. "You can make it right." Aaron's hands shook. "No," he said, louder now, and the defiance in that single word felt like a spark in the dark. "You don't get to use my guilt." He turned to me, eyes fierce. "Cole, when I say go, you go. Out the back, down to Camp 2. Don't stop. Don't listen." My throat tightened. "What are you doing?" Aaron looked at the stove again, then at the fuel. "I'm making noise," he said. "I'm breaking the script." He grabbed the fuel canister and stove with one hand, and with the other he ripped open a pouch of chemical hand warmers, shaking them violently to trigger heat. He shoved them against the regulator valves, against the radio battery pack, against anything that could carry a voice. Then he struck the stove igniter. The tiny flame appeared, wavering in thin air. The tent seemed to inhale. The shadow outside shifted just slightly, like it hadn't expected defiance. Aaron leaned close to the entrance flap and shouted through it, voice raw, "You want me? Come in and take me!" My skin crawled. Every instinct screamed at him to stop. But Aaron's defiance changed the air. It felt like watching someone stand up to a storm. For a second, nothing happened. Then the tent wall bulged inward, slowly, as if something pressed its weight against the fabric. Not a hand, not a shoulder, a broad, deliberate pressure, testing. Aaron held the stove flame steady, eyes wide but unflinching. The bulge grew, the stitching creaked, and then the zipper began to move, on its own, pulling down a few inches as if an invisible hand had found it from the outside. Aaron's face tightened. He didn't back away. He moved forward, and with one violent motion he shoved the stove and fuel toward the entrance, forcing flame and heat into the gap. The fabric flared, not into a roaring fire, but into a sudden burst of light and heat that made the shadow recoil. The pressure vanished as if whatever was outside had stepped back fast. The wind returned in a furious howl, tearing at the camp like it was angry we'd changed the rules. Aaron grabbed me by the harness and shoved me toward the rear of the tent. "Go!" I hesitated, one heartbeat too long, because leaving him felt like becoming the same kind of man he'd just confessed he used to be. Aaron's eyes locked onto mine. "Cole," he said, voice steady now in a way that terrified me, "this is the only way both of us live." My throat clenched. I nodded once, hard, and crawled out the back into the screaming wind. The camp behind me erupted in frantic motion. Fabric whipping, poles groaning, the thin smell of singed nylon carried on the air. I clipped into the line leading down toward Camp 2 and began descending, step by step, forcing my lungs to obey. Behind me, above the wind, I heard Aaron shout once more, words I couldn't make out. Then for the briefest moment the storm hushed. And in that hush, a voice, my own voice, spoke clearly from somewhere above, calm and certain, as if narrating an ending it had already written. He stayed. The crunching footsteps resumed, not behind me now, but around me, on the slope, on the invisible edges of the ridge, keeping pace as I descended into darkness. I didn't look back. I didn't answer my name. I just kept moving, because down was the only direction left that still belonged to me. Hours later, when the first grey light began to bleed into the sky, I reached Camp 2 in a state I can only describe as hollow. Hands numb, lips split. Mind narrowed to the fact that I was still breathing. Sherpas rushed out shouting, grabbing my arms, dragging me into shelter. Someone jammed warm tea to my mouth. Someone asked where Aaron was. I tried to speak, but my throat wouldn't form words. I just shook my head. They wrapped me in blankets, checked my oxygen, demanded answers I couldn't give. The camp was alive, noisy, real. Radios crackled with ordinary voices. The world felt stitched back together, and that's when one of the Sherpas, an older man with eyes that had seen too much, knelt close and held something out to me between two gloved fingers. A laminated photograph, Aaron's photograph, the one he'd shown me on the ridge. It was wet with melted frost, as if it had been carried in someone's palm for miles. I stared at it, heart thudding. The older man spoke softly, his English careful. "Found on the line," he said. "Above." I took it with trembling hands. The photo was the same. Aaron, his father, Eli Voss smiling at base camp. Except it wasn't. In the background, just behind the tents and prayer flags, there was a fourth figure now, slightly out of focus, standing at the edge of the frame. A man in modern climbing gear, a man wearing my exact jacket, my exact mask, my exact headlamp, facing the camera with a stillness that made my stomach turn. Because even blurred, even half hidden, I could tell what his expression was. He was smiling. And as I stared at the altered photograph, the camp radio across the tent crackled once, just once, through ordinary static. Then my wife's voice whispered my name, soft as breath against fabric. Cole.